Jack Reynolds inherited his grandfather's cabin, only to uncover a century-old tunnel hiding a dangerous secret that powerful people had buried to protect themselves. Grandpa Tom had sacrificed everything to keep this truth locked away, and now Jack faced the same impossible choice. Guided by courage and a promise to honor his grandfather, Jack dared to open the chest and reveal the hidden ledger. But just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this drama was, and why justice ultimately prevailed. Jack Reynolds had never thought he would return to Montana. The forests there were thick with memory, both good and bad, and after years of service overseas, Jack wasn't sure he wanted to face them again. But when news came that he had inherited his late grandfather's cabin, deep in a part of the wilderness few ventured into, something stirred inside him. A longing for quiet, for an escape from the noise in his head. The cabin wasn't much. A weathered wooden structure tucked between towering pines, with a sagging porch and windows clouded with age. Yet for Jack, it represented a promise, a place to heal. At 32, Jack carried more than just scars on his body. He carried memories that came without warning, echoes of distant places, of nights spent under foreign skies, and of friends he could no longer speak to without flinching. The war had left him restless, restless enough that sleep felt like a stranger. When he stepped out of his truck that first morning, he felt a strange mixture of hope and unease. Ranger, his German shepherd, padded beside him quietly, ears alert. The forest around them was alive, not with noise, but with a deep, patient stillness. The first 2 days passed with nothing remarkable. Jack unpacked his grandfather's old tools, fixed a creaking door, and explored the surrounding woods with Ranger at his side. He told himself this was exactly what he needed: fresh air, solitude, the kind of peace that came without interruption. But on the third morning, Ranger behaved differently. He woke Jack before dawn with low, persistent barks, then darted toward the far edge of the property near a massive oak tree. Jack followed, pulling on boots and grabbing a flashlight despite the growing light of morning. Ranger was already pawing at the earth, digging with fierce determination. The old oak stood alone at the clearing's center, its roots twisted and gnarled, as though holding secrets beneath the soil. Jack crouched beside Ranger and brushed dirt away with his gloved hands. His fingers struck something hard, something unnatural. A stone slab, weathered by time, emerged. It was rectangular, set flush with the ground, and covered in carvings that looked far older than the cabin itself. The symbols were unfamiliar to Jack. A series of angular lines and shapes, worn smooth but still distinct. His chest tightened. This was no ordinary rock. Ranger barked again, low and urgent. Jack looked down and realized that beneath the slab was an opening. The air that rose from the tunnel smelled cold and musty. A shadow seemed to stretch out toward him, as if the earth itself were pulling him in. Jack stepped back instinctively. He ran his hand over the stone slab, tracing the carvings without understanding them. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This isn't just a door. This is a secret." His grandfather had been a quiet man. Jack remembered him sitting by the cabin's fireplace years ago, telling stories of the woods without ever revealing their meaning. Grandpa Tom had talked about hidden things and watching over something, but he had never been specific. Jack had dismissed it then as the ramblings of an old man. Now, staring at the tunnel's darkness, doubt crept in. Had Grandpa Tom known about this place? Had he sealed it for a reason? A shiver ran down Jack's spine. He glanced at Ranger, who sat rigid, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the opening. The dog didn't look away. Something about the tunnel seemed to reach out to them both. Jack felt his heart beat faster. Questions flooded him. What lay beneath? Why had no one opened this for over 100 years? And, most unsettling of all, was this a discovery meant to be found now? For the first time since coming to the cabin, Jack felt something deeper than hope or peace. He felt intrigue, an unshakable pull toward the unknown. He didn't know it yet, but stepping toward that tunnel would change everything. Jack stood at the edge of the tunnel, the morning light behind him fading into shadows. Ranger's low growl echoed softly in the still air. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, not just because of what lay before him, but because of the history buried with it. His grandfather had always spoken of the forest in a way that hinted at more than just trees and wildlife. Grandpa Tom called it a place of guardians. Jack never knew exactly what that meant. Now, standing in front of this sealed passage, the words returned to him with strange clarity. Inside the cabin, Grandpa Tom's worn leather journal lay on the shelf where Jack had found it earlier. He had flipped through its pages before, never able to make sense of the sketches and symbols scrawled in faded ink. They seemed to match the carvings on the stone slab, angular marks that spoke of something lost to time. But there was something more. Phrases like "keep safe" and "the cost is great" were written over and over in Grandpa Tom's handwriting. Jack thought of those words now and felt them echo inside him. This wasn't curiosity alone driving him forward. It was duty. The duty to honor what his grandfather had protected. The decision came quietly. Jack gathered a flashlight and his backpack, tightened Ranger's leash, and stepped toward the opening. The tunnel swallowed them immediately, and the world outside disappeared. The air inside was damp, cool, and strangely still. It smelled of earth and something older, something unnameable. Every step Jack took seemed to deepen the silence, broken only by the faint sound of Ranger's paws crunching on stone and dirt. The walls were carved with symbols, faded but still visible in the beam of his light. Some were geometric, others more intricate, like scenes frozen in stone. Jack leaned closer, tracing the patterns with his fingers. They told a story, though fragmented. Scenes of settlers arriving in the forest, struggling to survive, marking their passage with these carvings. Other panels hinted at hardship, loss, and sacrifice. Somewhere deeper in those images was something more profound, something Jack could feel but not yet understand. Ranger stopped ahead, standing still with ears raised. Jack followed his gaze and saw a wider chamber opening before them. Light seemed to shift strangely there, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Jack paused, chest tightening. His mind drifted to Grandpa Tom again. The old man had fought his own battles quietly, battles Jack never knew about. Now Jack understood something. This tunnel was not an accident. It was a choice. His grandfather had chosen to guard this place, to keep its secret locked away. And now the responsibility had passed to him. Each step deeper into the tunnel brought an unexpected heaviness. It was more than the weight of air and stone. It was the weight of history, of sacrifice, of a promise passed silently through generations. Jack could feel it pressing against his chest like an unspoken question. Do you have the courage to see this through? He thought of the cabin outside, of the life he had left behind, of the war that had taught him that peace was fragile. And he thought of Ranger, silent beside him, trusting him without question. That trust became something tangible, a quiet force urging him forward. Jack took a deep breath. This was no longer just exploration. This was something bigger, something that connected him to his grandfather, and to a story that had waited 100 years to be uncovered. Somewhere in the depths of the tunnel, the carvings seemed to grow sharper, as if guiding him onward. Jack knew, without fully understanding how, that this path was more than curiosity or duty. It was a bridge between generations, and crossing it meant confronting something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But he stepped forward anyway. Ranger followed, and the tunnel swallowed them both. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching deeper than Jack could have imagined. For days he and Ranger moved through corridors of stone, guided by the faint traces of carvings and the instinct that something important lay ahead. Jack marked each step in his mind as if counting down to a reckoning he didn't yet understand. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the silence pressed against him like a living weight. On the fourth day of exploration, they entered a passage that opened into a wide chamber. The walls were covered with carvings unlike any Jack had seen before. Images of people standing in solemn gatherings, tools laid upon altars, and symbols intertwined in ways that spoke of ritual and promise. But the carvings seemed overshadowed by the presence of something else, a sealed iron chest resting in the chamber's center. It was heavy, worn with age, and bound with a thick, rusted lock. Jack's flashlight beam caught something on the lid, a set of initials scratched into the metal. His breath caught. T.R. Tom Reynolds, his grandfather's initials. The air seemed to still around him. This was not a discovery. This was a message. Jack stepped closer, his hand hovering over the cold metal. Every instinct told him to stop, but his curiosity was a tide he could no longer resist. Yet a deeper, darker thought began to take root. This chest had been hidden for a reason. Opening it meant crossing into something his grandfather had chosen to guard for decades. On a nearby stone table lay stacks of letters, brittle and yellowed. Jack picked one up, brushing away dust. The handwriting was his grandfather's, firm but careful. As he read, the weight in his chest grew heavier. The letters told a story, one of secrets, of danger, of promises made and kept. Grandpa Tom had written of a crime long buried involving powerful people in their town, a betrayal so deep that it had shaped the lives of generations. And this chest, Jack realized, was proof. Evidence that his grandfather had sworn to protect. The truth sank into him like a stone. This was no longer an adventure. This was a burden. The tunnel was not a relic of forgotten history. It was a tomb for a truth too dangerous to reveal. His grandfather had carried that burden alone, and now it had passed to him. Jack sank onto a stone bench, rubbing his face in his hands. Ranger sat beside him, quiet and watchful, as though understanding the gravity of the moment. For the first time, Jack felt doubt gnawing at him. If he opened the chest, he could uncover truths that might destroy lives, including his family's name. But if he left it sealed, the injustice would remain buried forever, and that too felt wrong. The tunnel seemed to close in around him. Every sound, Ranger's breath, the drip of water in the distance, felt amplified in the stillness. Jack thought of his grandfather's voice, quiet but firm, saying things he never understood as a boy. Some things are meant to stay hidden until the right time. Had this been that time? Or was the right time never coming? He looked at the chest again. It was more than iron and rust. It was a choice. and that choice pressed down on him harder than anything he had faced in his life. War had tested his body and mind, but this was testing his soul. Jack stood, pacing the chamber. The letters lay spread before him, each one a reminder of the cost his grandfather had paid to protect this secret. The more he read, the more the weight settled into his chest, growing heavier with every step. The despair was almost physical now, a shadow that filled the chamber and wrapped around his heart. He sank to the stone floor, leaning against the wall. Ranger rested his head on Jack's knee, offering silent comfort. Jack's thoughts spun in circles. He had no clear answer. To open the chest was to change everything. To leave it closed was to live with the truth unspoken. The burden was crushing him. And in that silence, Jack realized this was no longer just about a tunnel or a cabin. It was about who he was willing to be when the truth came calling. The tunnel was waiting. The storm came without warning. Rain hammered the roof of the cabin, wind rattled the windows, and the trees groaned under its force. Jack sat by the fireplace, Ranger curled at his feet, both of them silent in the glow of the flickering light. Outside, the world seemed torn apart, but inside, the weight in Jack's chest had grown heavier than ever. He thought of the tunnel, of the iron chest, of the letters he had read, and of the choice that had been laid before him. For nights, he wrestled with it. The truth was dangerous. It could destroy lives, even the name of his own family. And yet, to leave it buried felt like denying something deeper. The promise his grandfather had made, the burden he had carried in silence. Jack had tried to understand why Grandpa Tom had sealed the tunnel in the first place. Now, in the quiet hours of the storm, the answer came to him. It wasn't shame that had kept the secret hidden. It was protection. Grandpa Tom had known that the truth was not ready, that it carried consequences far beyond a single generation. He had sealed the tunnel to give time for strength to grow, for courage to awaken. And perhaps now, Jack realized, the time had come. Jack rose from his chair and went to the stone slab near the oak tree. The rain outside roared like a chorus of voices urging him forward. He gripped the edge of the slab, feeling its cold, worn surface, and with a deep breath pushed it aside. Ranger stepped beside him, ears alert, as the tunnel yawned open once more. The path led them to the chamber where the iron chest waited. Jack approached it with steady resolve. He felt no hesitation this time. The lock resisted, rust giving way to effort, until it finally gave way with a deep groan. Jack lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of items that seemed alive with history. Yellowed letters, photographs, tools worn smooth by time. At the center lay a ledger bound in cracked leather and a folded map marked with symbols and names. Jack opened the ledger carefully. Page after page listed names, people who had committed wrongs long ago, alongside dates, places, and descriptions. The map showed a path, a place where truth and justice could still be found. Jack's breath caught. This was the proof his grandfather had protected. This was the legacy of a man who had spent years guarding a secret, not for himself, but for others. It wasn't enough to keep it hidden any longer. It had to be brought to light. That night, Jack sat by the fire again, the storm still raging outside. Ranger rested his head on Jack's knee, and Jack held the ledger in his hands. He thought of the sacrifices Grandpa Tom had made, the quiet courage, the silence endured, the burden carried alone. Jack understood now that protecting the truth was not enough. To honor it, he had to act. By morning, the storm had passed. The air was sharp and clean, and sunlight broke through the clouds. Jack stepped outside with Ranger at his side, the ledger and map tucked carefully in his pack. He paused at the edge of the forest, looking back toward the cabin that had been the starting point of this journey. The forest seemed different now, not a place of secrets to be hidden, but of truths to be faced. Jack stood there in the light of the rising sun, breathing deeply. He was not the man who had arrived weeks ago. He had been tested, not in battlefields of distant lands, but in the quiet corridors of choice, fear, and conscience. He had wrestled with the weight of truth and the cost of courage, and he had chosen to walk forward. Ranger nudged his hand, reminding him of the present moment. Jack looked ahead, toward the path the map promised, toward the work he had to do. He felt something he hadn't in years: clarity. This was no longer about the past. It was about carrying a legacy. It was about truth, justice, and hope. Jack Reynolds stepped forward, Ranger beside him, and the forest behind them. The sun rose higher, painting the sky with light. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt ready. The journey had changed him, and now he was ready to change the world.